So veterans naturally through their training, right? They have honesty, they have integrity, attention to detail, loyalty, ability to be trained, very passionate, focused on the mission, right? And very dedicated to that. And these are some major attributes that many companies need, especially when it comes into cybersecurity, SOC roles, incident response.
SC Media, our diamond sponsor, Arctic Wolf, and our sapphire sponsor, Cohesity, are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Each month, the CISO Stories program explores a cybersecurity topic selected by Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community and provides content that examines that topic from a variety of perspectives. Hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, best-selling author of the CISO Compass, the CISO Stories weekly podcast features content powered by the 1,100-plus members of the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community. Listen to the CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome David Cross, SVP and CISO for Oracle SaaS Cloud. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Todd. It's great to be here.
So, before we get started on our topic today, I always like to find out what interested you to cybersecurity.
Well, do you want the short story or the long story, right? I'll try to keep it a little bit of both,
I want
right?
your best story.
Yeah, the true story is I'm a veteran, right? And I was returning from the last deployment on the carrier, the Eisenhower. We stopped in Naples, Italy, and I went into the Naval Exchange store, the bookstore, right? And I bought a book to read on the way back. And it was the first edition of Bruce Schneier's Applied Cryptography. And I was reading it, and I realized there's something here. There's a major opportunity, and I could not resist. And that kind of set my goal, is that this is the space I want to be in, and I'm going to find a way to get there. It all started with a simple tax-free book, at the Naval Exchange bookstore in Naples, Italy.
Wow. I mean, that is a pretty heavy, I know the book you're talking about, that's a pretty heavy duty book that it drew you in. Some people looking at that book, it might scare them away.
Well, there's an element, I think, of, computer science and that it's all the same, but like you want something different, something that is, kind of special. And I have to admit, right, because I was in the military, I was part of an electronic warfare, in jamming, surveillance squadron, and really kind of tied things together. Some of the work that we did was, I'll say, secret, right? But I think really that kind of drew me into that greater space. And I said, well, how do I find a way in? And I've always been a big reader, right? I'm a huge fan of books. Don't get, and I think as people that read are always advancing themselves, and it captured me.
Well, that's great. And I think we all have different starts, and I actually, as a writer of books, I wrote the CISO Compass book, which has been a very popular guide for CISOs. I'm encouraged by the fact that you're drawn into the field by reading a book. In some ways that seems to be a lost art today in our internet age of just wanting to get a quick answer to something. So pivoting to our topic today, being a veteran, and thank you very much for your service. Tell us a little bit about veterans impacting security.
Well, great question. I feel very fortunate of everything that I was able to do in my service and opportunities that came from it. But let's talk about the cybersecurity, industry and field, right? I think we all know that there's a lack of talent. There's a high demand, right? And especially a lot of these starting roles, like sometimes the SOC, right? Sometimes the early, analyst roles, sometimes the overall, detection in other areas. And we need people, right? But veterans, Russell, they need new opportunities, but they also bring a lot of unique attributes that almost all businesses need, whether it's cybersecurity or otherwise. What does that mean? So veterans naturally through their training, right? They have honesty, they have integrity, attention to detail, loyalty, ability to be trained, very passionate, focused on the mission, right? And very dedicated to that. And these are some major, major attributes that many companies need, especially when it comes into cybersecurity, SOC roles, incident response. You know how to operate by a playbook. You know how to operate under fire, no pun intended, right? And this is so, so important. And at the same time, I know the industry or the community is going to yell at me. It's like, they're actually at a lower cost than the average experienced professional that's not had that, right? Because they're in that transition. They're in the transition from the military world to the civilian world. And it's, anything to get in and get your foot in the door, they'll take it. And this is a major win-win for both sides.
And the traits that you talked about, the mission, I've seen this of people that have had that background, that they're, it's that mission to serve and to carry through. And how is that instilled in the military?
Well, I would say it's training, training, training. You train like you're going to fight, right? And I think that's the things that you learn, right, is through all the elements, is that it's about you're given a mission, and that you can most successfully accomplish that mission, through your playbook, right? Through your checklist, through your training, right? And sometimes when it comes into security incidents and activities, right, it's all about the element of following the playbook, right? And because it's been tried and proven, right? So let's go back to the military. So a lot of times, whether I was in aviation or other things, well, why do we have these checklists? Why do we have these manuals? Is because it's been proven time and time again. This is how to be most successful, how to avoid making mistakes. Someone doesn't get injured, right? We build the same things for SOC, for incident response, the playbooks. They've been proven to time and time again. And so that's the one thing, is you get it instilled in you, right? It's almost innate to a degree, right? And that's what you've learned at time and time again. And that's how I think the U.S. military is very, very successful throughout the years.
The cybersecurity industry has an effectiveness problem. New technologies, vendors, and solutions emerge every year, yet we still see headlines filled with high-profile breaches. Designed to help you monitor, detect, respond, and recover from cyber attacks whenever and wherever they strike, Arctic Wolf provides the first cloud-native security operations platform, empowering organizations of any size to stand up to world-class security operations with the push of a button. Learn more about their suite of fully managed security operations solutions at CISOstoriespodcast.com/Arctic Wolf. Well, I know, David, in talking with Ron Ross from NIST, he is still working with NIST because he believes in the mission so much, and he came out of the military as well. And I see this pattern, and I could name person after person. So how do we recruit? I mean, we're right around Veterans Day at the moment, and so how do we recruit and reach out to these veterans to bring them into the fold?
Great question. I think there's many companies, I'll say like Oracle I work for, I also work for Microsoft, they're building up good programs. So they're large companies, they have programs, they have a dedicated recruiting that understands the community, right? Because it is a different community. How can they be found? And sometimes veterans don't know how they can find the companies that are recruiting. So I think a big part of it is looking at, you'd be surprised, I think, starting with many companies that look at their existing population, they probably have veterans, right? And really reaching out to them to building that community, building like an employee resource group, those type of things, saying, hey, we want to grow this. We want to build upon this. We want to extend this, right? And actually build in an ERG based on veterans to help with that exactly. And I think that's one of the best starts that many companies find is with that, because then naturally the community grows. Because as we all know, it's all about networking, right? The classic, since you like books, let's go way back to the book that I really wish I could, it was so perfect for today, but it's not, never eat lunch alone, right? It's kind of like never Zoom alone. I don't know, but it's really networking is so important.
Yeah, and I know that we don't reach out into those different communities. And are there any challenges with that veterans have in trying to come into a corporate work world where the military had its structure and authority? And do you see things that tips that we could give to veterans as they're moving into that space?
Well, I think this is where the community is growing as well. I think an element is one of the things that we try to do. Myself, where we create a podcast called Maven, right, from Oracle, right, really about helping the community, right, in adjusting and things like that. Because there's an element in the military, everything's very hierarchical, very top down, very playbook, and sometimes people may struggle a little bit, is because in most commercial companies and civilian world, it's much more matrix, right? It's not necessarily top down, right? You can challenge things, which you may not be able to do in the military. So we always recommend to a lot of people, by start, is finding a mentor that from the community, right? And so that finding someone that may be in the company, or a company, let's say a company that you're going to join, is like find another veteran, right? And help, and actually having be buddied up, or a mentor to helping that transition. It's kind of like that learning, changing the vernacular, right, per se. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I've learned and observed over the years.
And so when we get into things like leadership and those positions, what sort of training do military personnel bring to the table?
Well, I think again, I think a big part of it is it's a lot of the attributes, right? Honesty, or say some of the attributes, I say values, right? It's how you're open and transparent, right? You're very inclusive. I think one of the things that people don't realize, especially the U.S. military, it is a diverse slice of society, right? Right? It is very inclusive. Everyone is an equal, right? Everyone is welcome. And that's one part of it. Another element is, I say, honesty, integrity, right? You follow these things, right? And it's important, right? You communicate, you share, right? That's very important. The other element is about of loyalty, right? And that you have a mission and you're focused on it and you're transparent about that as well, and how you get there. So overall, from a leadership perspective, I think I'll say is maybe one of the challenges that some people face is that when in the military, it's very top down, very hierarchical, right? That means you may only want to go up the chain and down the chain, and you never want to jump around it. And actually, culturally, that's not sometimes the right thing to do when we're in the cybersecurity space. Is that, well, you need to raise a problem, right? But maybe your manager is busy, or you're afraid of going above your manager. Sometimes that's not the right thing, and you need to jump the chain of command. But you also, at the same time, you should be open and transparent about it.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of working with boards and so forth, do you see any advantages that the veterans would have in that arena?
Well, I think I love this particular one, and I'll give two comments on this particular area. One is an element is that is just like in aviation or nuclear power, those type of things, right? Is that you need to follow, right? You never hide anything, right? There's always an element is this is what we need to track. These are the risks. This is what needs to be known, right? This is what we need to document. There's nothing hidden, right? And because the idea is that you want to make sure it's always safe to say that there's a risk. We're not going to hide it. That's how airplanes would crash, or nuclear, submarines, would have an explosion, those type of things. And so you always know that you can you encourage, for people being open and transparent and always documenting things. Now, that's important to boards because they need to know, is there a true risk, or are people hiding things because they're afraid to tell us? The next thing I think for boards, and I think this is I think the challenge overall for the CISO community in general, right, not just veterans, but I think is boards is you need to understand your board, right? What is their vernacular? What is their background? What is their experience? And so that if you only speak in, let's say, military language, or you only speak in security language, they may not be that, right? And so you need to really make sure you understand of how they like things to be presented, how they will understand things based on their backgrounds, so it can be most effective, right? I'll give you an example. Another example I talk about, let's say security and compliance, right? Or let's take compliance. And an element is like sometimes why do developers sometimes struggle with audits and compliance? Well, it's the vernacular. If you tell them, hey, we need to know how this control works and what is the evidence. Control and evidence? What the heck are you talking about? Oh, hang on. You're looking for an access check and the log for the results of the access check. Oh, okay. But if you speak to them in the wrong vernacular, they may turn you off or they may not understand. And I think that's a very important element for all of us in security and compliance.
Well, and I know in the military, there's a lot of different abbreviations for things. It's like a totally different language. Is there some sort of like mapping between, that to help that transition from the military to the corporate world to this different terminology that you're aware of?
Boy, Todd, you say you write books. I think that would be a really popular book. I've never seen anything like that. And I think that would be a really great opportunity. And I think the community would love something like that. Because I think many people rely upon two things. One of training and documentation, and second is having that mentor and a buddy to kind of in that, right? It's like, hey, we're going to onboard you to this company. It's like, here's all the acronyms, right, that you are unique to this company. We think of all the high-tech companies. Yep, they have lots of acronyms. How do you onboard them? How do you say it's not grape Kool-Aid, it's orange Kool-Aid now, everybody. Get used to it. But the challenge also sometimes is things aren't always documented, right? Mm-hmm. And that is maybe one of the strengths of a veteran is like, hey, if you give them the documentation, they're like, all right, they're on board. But if you don't give them documentation, well, how do they onboard, right? It's much more challenging unless you have, a mentor, a buddy there to show them through the ropes.
Mm-hmm. In terms of things like crisis management, I think of like a ransomware attack. There has to be some strengths that come from the military because you're looking at defending things, and it just seems like that would be a natural fit to be working on incident response.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the overall strengths is because you're kind of trained, how to be under fire. You're trained of actually saying, okay, there's ransomware or there's an escalation, right? All right, well, here's the playbook. Here's how we're going to follow it, right? Is everyone's like, where do we go? What do we do? Oh, hang on. All right, let's document things. Let's take charge, right? Taking charge of a call, documenting things, tracking things down, right? And being there and dedicated, saying, wow, these are long, this could be a long day. Like, we've done that, right? Those is the military. We go back, even not during the war times, like it's 24 hours on, 24 hours off. We know how to do it. We can do that. And I think that's something that they know, and instantly when it happens, the fire is coming in. You're like, okay, I'm stepping in. Here's my role. And guiding people, being that anchor or that oak tree, right? When the storm is blowing, right? That's one of the major advantages that many people find in both, SOC, DART, incident response, or not just cybersecurity incident response, but like service desks, right? The overall operational service desks that they're very good at providing that stability, providing that structure, providing those playbooks, and guiding people through it.
So where should a veteran start? Say I'm listening to this podcast, or I'm a CISO listening to this podcast, and I want to figure out how do I get the veterans in. What steps should I be taking?
Well, I think let me start with two parts. Let's just start on the veteran side, then I'll start on the company side, right? So I'm going to go back to when I left the military. So I took, I'm still active duty. I took some leave, and I went and took a Microsoft Certified Professional exam or course, right? And then the exam for like Windows NT 3.5, right? You can make an MCP, right? I said I needed to get something in there to get my foot in the door, right? It's a lot of money at the time. This is a couple $1,000s, 20, 30 years ago. I took a week of leave, right, from the military to do this in my own time, to get my foot in the door, to get enough that someone would talk to me, right? The same thing is, I think it's better even today. It's like, look at Coursera and LinkedIn Learning and there's so many out there. It's like, I tell veterans, go find the company you want to go to, right? Go find what type of skills you want. And guess what? Go spend a couple $100s and get some skills from Coursera, right? Get something just enough to get your foot in the door. Is it a dream job? Maybe not. But it's just about get your foot in the door. And from there, it starts. And that's what I did. That's what I recommend to everybody. I cannot stress that enough. Next, I would say, let's coming back on the company side, right? I think as the company side is saying that, okay, identify you have a need, right? And I think we've talked about a few of them here. So, all right, do you have a veteran community? Do you have a veteran employee resource group or not? If not, why don't you form one? Because I think naturally when you form that community, then you get the critical mass and saying that, let's grow this community, right? Let's get some veterans in that can meet some of our needs and our challenges, right? And it's that community that will have the network and that actually can help build out the connections with recruiting and how to find people, how to connect with people, what to look for, right, in the veteran community. And I think that using that critical mass or that base is the best starting point for all companies.
That sounds like good advice. So people in the military will have different security clearances. Is there an issue with trying to maintain those going into the private workforce, or how do you navigate that?
Ooh, really good question. So I think let me start with the good, right? Or maybe should I start with the bad? If I start with the bad, is that a lot of people are in may stay in the National Guard or reserves or things like that, can maintain that clearance, otherwise, and especially when they go to jobs that doesn't require a clearance. So, but if they don't, and you want to maintain the clearance, you go to an employer that has no need for that, then you're going to lose it. But here's the really good thing is the high-tech companies, the big cloud providers, they all need a gazillion people with clearances, right? A gazillion, right? There is way more demand than there is supply, right? And there's tons of opportunities. And so I could say for lots of people, let's say you're a mechanic, work on an airplane, and yes, you have a clearance, but you've never worked on computers before. Well, maybe that's a bit too far, but like you've got computer expertise, but you're not a developer. You're not about operations. But if you're willing to learn, you have a door open for you, is to get your foot in the door. There's various boot camps. You can kind of train yourself to a degree. Get your foot in the door because that clearance is so important in many of these roles in the cloud now. It is a major opportunity that is, I think, I cannot recommend anyone passing that up as you're leaving the service.
Yeah, and I also see there's kind of an affinity to regulation. I worked for an organization once that we were a highly regulated healthcare insurance company, and at one time I had a person from the Navy, from the Army, and from the Air Force. And I just said, well, I just need one good Marine around here. I don't know if they like that joke or not, but but what I saw in their strengths was their ability to deal with regulation and just get down into the detail and say, this is what we need to be doing, and then figure out the plan to go forward from that.
Absolutely. I think that comes back again to the elements of the playbooks, attention to detail, right? Because in the military, I think no matter what your profession, your MOS, your skill set was, right, you had to follow the manuals, you had to follow the regulations, end of story. You had to understand them. And I think a lot of those spaces, especially, audit, compliance, other areas or regulatory places that they're ideal for that, right? It's ideal to bring them in, and it can help you working through that because attention to detail, following the process, working through it. And sometimes it can be tedious, but they know how to work through that. And I think many people that that don't come from the military may have a harder time with that.
So this has been great, David. So as we go forward here and we want to get more veterans into this workspace, what final advice do you have for emerging CISOs, current CISOs, new CISOs, as they're trying to build out their workforces and have more veterans in the mix?
Thanks for reaching out. That topic, Todd, is I think for a lot of them is that, really looking at, what are your challenges, what are your gaps, right? Especially it's sometimes a lot of these, initial roles, right? Sometimes the SOC roles, sometimes initial analysis roles, those type of things, right? And saying really of reaching out to, if you don't have an employee resource group, you don't have veterans in your company, reach out to some of the other companies and actually ask for help. You'd be surprised, even though there are many competitors out there, if another company says reaches out and saying that, how do you guys hire veterans? We want to help the community as well. It's a natural affinity. And veterans, we are all together. We're always supporting it. That will never change for the rest of our lives. That's part of it. And I think that they can take advantage of it in helping themselves in growing that. And the other element is when the cybersecurity community, I'm a big fan and proponent of common defense, right? We're not competing to say who can best defend against, I would say, name your favorite nation state attacker and other, crimeware, out there. But the more that we work together and make ourselves safer and protected, right, the harder time the attackers are going to have hurting any of us.
I think that's such a great point because, and we've talked about this in industry quite a bit, of just how, the attackers are banding together. Right? They're sharing information. They share their exploits. They share the vulnerabilities of organizations. But as organizations, many times we are siloed and we don't, we share to a point. And I think that's a key strength that veterans could bring, and a discipline that could be brought to many of our organizations.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing this more and more, not just to the veterans, but the overall communities. I'm very involved in the Teammate Village, right, which we share a lot of common defense. I'm also, very involved with the, IT ISAC, right? Again, hey, we share threat intelligence. We share attack information. Even though we may be major competitors with each other, it's about common defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, David. I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks for having the opportunity to, kind of spread the word, and let's grow the community a little bit further.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to Arctic Wolf, our diamond sponsor, and Cohesity, our sapphire sponsor. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast, and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.